Welcome. This is Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host, Dr. Reid and I discuss the origins and uses of Hape, the tobacco snuff used by indigenous cultures of the Amazon basin for thousands of years. We discuss and explore the many uses of Hape, including ceremonial uses, spiritual, medicinal, contemplative, and much, much more. We even reveal our own experiences using Hape as a meditation and introspection tool. Folks, if you're enjoying the show and you want to support us, you can do that by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. If the platform you are listening to us on allows for it, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can write a comment telling us what you think of the show. We read every one of those comments, folks, and we really appreciate your support. Your listenership means everything to us, so please let us know what you think of the show, and if there's anything you'd like to hear from us that we haven't covered already, or anything we need to improve on, like my diction or, I don't know, my beard or something. Thank you so much, and please enjoy today's episode on Hape. Reid, today we're going to talk about Hape. And let me just tell you a little story about how I've been using this sacred tobacco snuff for my own meditation. The other day, I got up early like I am wont to do to exercise, and I was tired. I didn't want to exercise. Didn't want to go into my hot, stuffy garage and throw iron around. So I went in and sort of did the minimum to maintain my fitness, and I was thinking, I think I'm gonna meditate for the second half of my exercise time, my designated exercise time. So it happened to be a very beautiful morning here in Utah, and so I went into my backyard, got out my lawn chair, oriented myself to the east, and as the sun was rising out of this canyon that I live nearby, I put in my earbuds and started listening to some East Forest, and self-administered this Hape, which of course we'll talk more about in this episode, with a little device called I always forget how to pronounce it, but Caripe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as I had my eyes closed and was meditating on my intention for that morning, I could feel the sunrise. So my eyes were closed. I wasn't watching the sunrise, but I could feel the sunrise.
Could you taste it?
No, what I was tasting was the tobacco dripping down the back of my throat. But
spicy.
It was a little spicy. But it was amazing because it was quiet. I could hear some roosters. I could hear some sprinklers in this suburban paradise that I live in. And I was feeling the sunrise, and I had it's pretty, I don't know how to describe it, but I was very embodied. And the way I like to describe the way I've been using Hape lately is it opens up a clear channel directly to my intuition. So I had a little notepad nearby, and I was just furiously writing all these thoughts that I had and things I wanted to do. And I'm relatively new to the Hape journey, but was floored by how impactful that morning was for me.
Amazing. Was that yesterday by chance?
I think it might have been 2 days ago. I can't remember, but it was this week.
Because yesterday morning, I may have been doing Hape at the exact same time. Just a few miles down the road.
Serendipitous.
I met up with some friends at a cold plunge place in Provo called Plunge. You need to come try it out.
I would like to.
It's
yeah.
cool.
It's on the bucket list.
It has 2 cold plunge tubs and a big sauna. I think there are 4 to 6 people in there at a time, and you're often gathering in the sauna and then taking turns in twos going out and sitting in the cold plunge. There's a 40 degree or a 50 degree, and depending on how much of a glutton you are for cold punishment. But we were doing a Hape ceremony in the sauna and had some ceremonial sacred songs on. It was pretty neat.
That is awesome. So for our listeners who don't know what the hell we're talking about, what is Hape?
Hape, spelled either H-A-P-E or Rape, R-A-P-E, with that accent, is a combination of sacred plants, often with mapacho, aka Nicotina rustica, a rather potent sacred blend of mapacho that It's thought to be one of the master plants. And it's administered typically by a shaman or curandero into your nose, one nostril at a time or both, with an intention. It might be to bring about, like you said, visions, insight, clarity. It might be for physical healing. It might be for a reset or for energy. Like traditionally, indigenous people would use it like a certain blend. And this is often gathered by women, like intuitively created. And then it might be administered at night to have dreams about where to hunt the next morning. Then a different blend, energizing clarity, like supersensory perception might be given in the morning to help you in the hunt. And then others for rites of passage ceremonially, etc.
So you're using the word blend. So, one Hape preparation isn't the same as the next Hape preparation. The common, I guess, base is that mapacho, right? It's this tobacco.
Yeah, there are mapacho-free Hapes out there. When you try them, it's usually just a different experience because a lot of the experience is from the mapacho, that potent nicotine, and what it does for this both calming and energizing, or like a calm alertness, a grounding presence that it can bring about.
Right. So the way there's evidence that these Hape or tobacco snuffs have been used in the Amazon basin for thousands of years. There's, some evidence that the Incas used things like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like tobacco, it's been in use for 6,000+ years. Snuff, or administered in the nose, like when I went digging to find historically how far back it goes, there were at least some pre-Columbian kind of Brazilian tribes, for example, with documented use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I was curious to find out like how it's prepared. You were talking about that a little bit, but usually combined with ash from sacred trees, like trees, either the bark or the wood of the tree, where they burn it down and then they filter out impurities like any black charred parts that haven't been burned to that white fine ash that they're looking for, and then they'll combine it. Those sometimes with roots or seeds or petals, flowers, things like that, to make these different blends you were talking about.
Yeah, very aromatic. Depending on the blend, like you can look at them, they're different hues. Like it might be brown, a lighter brown, darker brown, or a green. You'll find even some components of ayahuasca in certain Hape blends, or sananga. The one we did before has marichi in it, a Brazilian fruit tree, where I'm assuming they're getting the bark, like you said, but maybe other parts of the plant. And then there was mint in that one, which, and I guess I just disclosed that we pregame this episode with a little Hape ritual.
Yeah. Which was great. And I got to administer to Reid with my tepi that I got on Etsy. And it's a made of Palo Santo wood, and it was the first time I'd used this tepi, and I'm honored to have used it on you, Reid.
The first recipient, unless the Etsy sellers tested it.
Maybe they did. I hope they cleaned it afterward. But
yeah, no, that was beautiful. Thank you for the pre-game Hape.
Yeah,
and the new tepi seems to work great.
It does, and then Reid used it for myself, and yeah, it was a great way to start this podcast because, like I said, for me at least, it opens up this wide channel to my core self, to intuition, and helps me be clear.
You want to describe, I'm curious about the varieties of the Hape experience. Do you want to describe your experience with Hape in general, and maybe I can add mine?
Yeah, I'm certain there are people who are listening to this podcast who are more experienced with Hape than we are, but we just wanted to talk about it because it's such a cool and beautiful medicine, and used often in ceremony space, even with other plant medicines. It's not uncommon to have a Hape ceremony before an ayahuasca ceremony, for example.
That's how I encountered it, is a few years back in ayahuasca ceremonial settings in the jungle.
Mm-hmm. So at least I'll speak from my personal experience on the varieties that I have had. And again, depending on the blend, depending on my intention, where I'm at spiritually, psychologically, emotionally that day, whether or not I'm being intentional or maybe a little bit too casual. I've had a variety of experiences, right, as I've experimented with this. The positive ones are as I described. I feel if I'm administering it to one nostril and then the other, a burning sensation that goes, up behind my eye, all the way through the crown of my head on that side. And that eye will start to water a bit. And it's spicy up there, which it's not a sensation I dislike, but it's not one I would like all the time.
Yeah.
Especially if you administer it pretty powerfully and get all the way up into your sinus cavity.
On one side of your head at first.
Right.
That was the trippiest thing for me at first. The first Hape experience I had was, do you ever get a tingling sensation on your head from wasabi or horseradish?
Mm-mm.
No? It might just be my, I don't know, individual DNA or something. How about with certain spicy foods?
Not usually.
Yeah.
No.
Because that's a sensation I get on one side of the head, just like a tingling, as if I just snorted wasabi or something.
Yeah. For me, it's like an icy hot feeling, but it's just that whole, it goes, from the nose, behind the eye, across that entire hemisphere of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll do the other side. And then if I relax into it and surrender to the moment and really feel into the experience, I'll feel it sort of channel down into my heart and then all the way down to my fingertips. And it's a full body relaxation, grounding. It's very grounding. Sometimes if I choose to stand up a little too early, I can feel a little dizzy, depending on the dose, like how much I shot up there. And then every once in a while, maybe like 2 times, I've gotten a little nauseated. And my guess is that it was probably dose dependent. I think I just did maybe a little bit too much.
Yeah, I've seen that happen many times, in fact. And I can generally tie it to, the dose someone receives. Like there are some shamans or like experienced or self-proclaimed who like to dish out a whopping dose of Hape. And I can see the value, like with any plant medicine, it is a different experience at a high dose. I'll give you that. But I personally am a fan of not turning someone off from a plant medicine forever by blasting them or obliterating them on their first ever experience, because I do hear that a lot. Like people say reactively when they hear about Hape, oh, I'll never try that again. That kicked my ass.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate because it is an intense experience at first for many. And if you go too high in the dose, almost predictably, you can have nausea, sometimes purging. And some see it as that's part of the experience. And I don't want to argue that at all. I think it's a beautiful, like you said, for me, it's a beautiful tool in my life, ritually, ceremonially, that I think it is sad that some people have been turned off by it for years because it was so intense their first time or most recent time.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking of my first time it was administered to me. It was very gentle, and because I wasn't familiar with it or how to set intention with it. It was more of like, at least in the context where I was, it was, hey, want some Hape? And I was like, what's that? Brief description. Sure. I'm kind of up for stuff. I like to try stuff. So yeah. And I remember thinking, well, that was uncomfortable, but not altogether unpleasant. And I just sort of filed it away in the back of my head. And then the universe presented Hape to me again later in a more ceremonial, more intention-based context. And that's when I really had a special experience with it.
Yeah. So sometimes I'll give it or receive it through a tepi that has 2 heads. You've experienced that.
Yeah. For those of you watching on YouTube, I have a Gripe that's a 2-pronged one. I haven't been able to make this one work because the prongs aren't long enough to reach my big nose. But
and that's a fun other variety of the experience to get it twice. Although I must say that I do like the alternate nostril approach. And there are different opinions here about starting with the left, closing with the right, or vice versa, even depending on time of day or moon phase cycle.
Yeah, I've heard left is death, right is rebirth. Lots of different opinions on what these things might mean.
That's the beauty of the ceremony and the beauty of, I love attending or working with different lineages of plant medicines. Like every time I go to a different like plant medicine ceremony, there, and whether or not they include like Hape as part of it, there's a lineage they come from and a different approach they have to the whole ritual that I just find fascinating.
How about the varieties of experience? But if I can take your question and toss it back to you.
Yeah, so my first ever Hape experience was similar to what you described. I'd say it was a pretty good sized dose. And I did feel that intense tingling on one side of my head for, a couple minutes until they did the other side, asked if I was ready for that next side. And then it was more balanced. I noticed that often like a tear or two or many will stream down my cheek, starting with the side that it was given on at first. I noticed that with you when we did that one side, there's a tear. And sometimes these are like physiologic Hape tears, like onions are burning. Sometimes for me, it's definitely a heart opening thing, and it can unlock tears of joy or gratitude through the meditation or the experience. But so I'll get that burning, tingling sensation, that initial wave. It's almost like a mild Sananga eye drops that passes. You ride that wave, and then for me, it feels like it both grounds me and elevates my spine and my crown simultaneously. Like it connects me to the earth and the heavens at the same time, where I just feel like, boom, my spine elongates, my shoulders have a weight. I can notice, depending on the blend, depending on the time of day, a tingling that moves throughout my body, or an energy or vibrations that move through my body. Like you said, you could even feel it in your fingertips sometimes. And my breath becomes really substantial. Like my experience of breathing is delicious. Like even though it might be hard initially to breathe through the nose because there's Hape in it, depending on the blend at first. Breathing is so nourishing and an important part of it. I'll do it sometimes with music, sometimes without, like in silence. And it's so beautiful either way, sometimes with a guided meditation.
Yeah, I was telling you earlier before we were recording that I've been using Sam Harris's Waking Up app and some of the guided meditations on there with my Hape meditations. And that's been really special, just because his meditations can sometimes get they feel esoteric, especially when he's trying to get you to observe the observer and get beyond the duality of self and other. And at least for my very busy mind, that's very challenging. But with Hape, it just sort of helps clear the channel, as I was talking about, and get there a little bit better.
How long does it last for you?
It's pretty brief. Especially if I'm not really present with it, it's like my heart opens for 60 seconds and then I can feel it closing again. But if I'm present with it, it lasts 5 minutes.
Yeah. I've been journaling, writing about the experience as well, but also with my scientific lens on, like designing a potential study design around it. Like how might we really learn about the experience and the varieties of the experience and from different blends. But I've noticed that it is like that 5 or 6 minutes typically for me and those I've sat with. But 5 to 10, 15, there's certainly some lingering effects, 10 to 15 minutes out, especially at a high dose. And what you mentioned about the high dose and the nausea, nicotine, like many substances, is different at low dose than high dose. Like energizing at low dose, it can be actually sedating at high dose.
Yeah, because I do notice that my body feels a little heavy afterward. I wouldn't want to go for a run, right, or lift weights or whatever after doing Hape. Sometimes it is energizing though and buzzing, and especially if I've had a lot of insights during my ceremony, I want to go and do.
Yeah,
I want to go and act.
I remember working in ayahuasca retreat settings as on, say, puke bucket patrol, a space holding smudge stick holder, things like that.
Right.
And or just sitting in as participants. Before I really knew much about Hape, I remember saying, what the heck are the shamans doing over there with this little like sound and a self-administered pipe or like a little bottle, because it was dark in these outdoor ceremony settings in the jungle. And then I remember chatting with a shaman who I got to know really well about. He's like, oh, dude, I was doing Hape throughout as part of like my process, my ceremony. And he had admitted that part of it was to really recalibrate into this clear, energetic space that he was like stepping into to work with all these participants. And part of it is wakefulness. Like,
Yeah. Another aspect that I use Hape for is what I call the ordeal. It's like being in an ice bath or being in a sauna or certain psychedelics. The ordeal, the challenge, can be therapeutic itself, because at least for me, at least what I've been working on lately is surrendering in the presence of the ordeal. I notice when my body resists, whether I'm in an ice bath or a cold shower or in a sauna, or in this case with Hape, it makes things worse. And we've talked a lot about triggers being friends to follow, and there's lots of mental health analogs for that kind of metaphor of relinquishing control, surrendering, and finding the beauty on the other side of that. So I like my mint blend, in part because the mint, even though I like the smell of mint, but having it straight in your nasal passages is also a little challenging.
Intense. Yeah. And I think in general, it can be intense, the initial wave of it. But I like what you said about the ordeal and the hero's journey, the arc of it. And it is the same with many plant medicines, both these like Sananga type practices that show up as part of rituals and ceremonies that teach us to surrender, but even like ayahuasca, psilocybin. Last week we talked about LSD and how there is a come up that can be difficult for some, and there's an expansive opening into a blissful state on the other side of that you can get to if you ride the wave.
But you got to ride the wave, right?
Yeah.
And we close the door to that blissful state if we resist.
Yep.
So that's one of the ways I've found Hape to be useful is the more experiences I get riding that wave to completion, I feel like the better I am at doing it in my day-to-day life, right? One of the big challenges we have as humans, but also humans who are in the helping profession, is helping other people trust that process will work. That if they do ride the wave and be mindful of their parts that are resisting and take good care of them and allow themselves to get through the very, very challenging ordeal that they are facing, that's where mental health lies. That's where spiritual wellness is. That's where, your actualized self is discovered.
The only way out is through.
I might or may not be wearing a shirt that says that very thing. The only way out is through.
Oh yeah, I forgot you're wearing the shirt. What we resist persists, like the difficult phase of an experience. So much of it is our resistance or our emotional reaction to the stimulus or the brief suffering that can expand it and get in the way of the blissful parts of it, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything else we should say about what Hape is or how it's prepared?
There's a lot historically. Did you ever watch the show Bridgerton?
My wife loves it.
I didn't watch it either. I've seen clips because I guess people really like the costumes and the
sex scenes, apparently, is what I keep hearing.
But in there's this Queen Snuffy Catherine, who has this, like aristocrats did, several hundred years ago.
Snuff box,
this beautiful box that they keep their powdered tobacco in and snuff. Like you'd think, some people would assume when seeing that, oh, they're doing cocaine or something like that. No, they're doing something perfectly legal, although it seems like she developed a habit to it. As many people have, it's based on a there's some real accounts of aristocrats, kings, queens, becoming quite fond of it. In fact, that's where nicotine came from. I think like 1500s, this French man, Jean Nicot, Nicot, ships back tobacco seeds to the King of France and brings some back, and became an instant celebrity or success because they loved it. And that's where within 100 years, tobacco smoking, snuffing had spread to Siberia. Even in Turkey, there's a snuff. Like, I forget what it's called, but a snuff, a tobacco ceremonially.
And only found in the Americas. Like there's no, I mean, not a tobacco history expert, but no evidence of indigenous tobacco in Europe.
As far as I know, the origins come from South Central America, Latin America, Brazil. The Amazon is certainly where Hape in the practices we're talking about comes from, and has shown up in the U.S. and Canada in recent years, thanks to the rise of psychedelics and ayahuasca. Yeah, like our experience, like received it in ceremonial settings.
Right.
Like when I was in the jungle and was very intrigued. Even though there was a ceremony, it was all the therapists and medicine team at an ayahuasca retreat setting and having a Hape experience. And one of the participants, first time, many of us, it was first time, but one of them had maybe just too high of a dose for where they were at then and spent the next few hours purging and really had a rough night.
Yeah, like all the things we talk about on this podcast, by things I mean plant medicines, psychedelics. They need to be approached carefully and with as much informed consent as possible, and intention, because sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. I'm thinking about Hape, like a lot of these plant medicines that have origins in ancient traditions, that now that they're becoming more popular, you sort of inject capitalism and Westernism into the story. And I was reading one place where, this tribe that had their specific preparation in Brazil of Hape was secretive. They used internally. And then they said they were happy to sell it to Westerners, and they used the proceeds to pay for education for their kids, things like that. But there's some concern with just random people making things and calling them Hape. So if you're going to Google Hape and try to get some as a result of listening to our podcasts, be careful. Be careful about sourcing, and sourcing ethically too.
Yeah, but Hapes are, unlike some of those snuffs we were talking about in aristocrats, snuffy boxes that is typically just tobacco.
Right.
Hape contains, I haven't seen a Hape that is only Mapacho tobacco. And like I said, there are some that don't even have Mapacho in it, which some people seek out because they're staying away from nicotine, for example. It's definitely worth mentioning that Hapes have a variable amount of nicotine in it. There's one study in PubMed on Hape. I'd like to add to this like sparse body of literature, but there's one that analyzed the nicotine content and the pH, because it matters, of different Hape blends, and it was like from 5 to 50 milligrams per was it like a gram of Hape or something like that, but a wide range.
Yeah, it's quite the range.
Yeah. And so nicotine is fascinating because in the US and Canada, it has a bad reputation because of the American tobacco and cigarette industry. So when I first was introduced to ceremonial tobacco, Mapacho in ceremonial settings, I was like, wait a second. What is that? It smells a little different than cigarettes. And it was used, it's a Mapacho, Nicotina rustica, is very different than the nicotine in cigarettes. It's like 20 times as potent, so you don't even inhale it. If you inhale, I was warned, you might throw up.
Yeah. compared to nicotine tobacco.
So you could get hooked on it, but it's used ceremonially with intention. So the people, who were working with it around me were not hooked on it, and they used it with reverence and in those settings mainly. Yeah.
And because, like you said, it's not super well studied, I wonder about some of the blends. And because we're blowing something up our nose, and you have this sensitive mucous membranes, and some of it's ash. It's burnt. They filter out the charred part, and then they just put in the ash part. But there's some concern about possible carcinogenic.
Yeah. And
compounds.
so that's something I want to dive into more personally, because in that one study on Hape, it not only looked at the milligrams and the pH, but it also looked at the presence of things like polyaromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, like the kind of oxidants or carcinogens at a given dose and frequency that show up on your barbecued charred meats too.
Right.
So like we're exposed to these day-to-day life. The FDA has limits of considered to be safe. Like they're ones we will encounter unless you're living an extremely clean like dietary life, which has its own challenges. But that is something that I wonder about. Not a huge concern, because at the same time, like in that Morichi blend that we experienced, Morichi is a potent antioxidant known for its like anti-cancer properties, the fruit of it anyway. And so I think there are these beneficial healing properties of the plants, but this open question that we tend to hyper focus on in some ways in the West of like, what's the dark side?
Right. Yeah. In addition to antioxidant properties, some of these blends, at least when I was reading about them, proclaimed antibacterial properties, or that Hape was actually a great way to cleanse your nasal passages, to even treat people who were experiencing infection.
Yeah. So the curanderas, medicine woman, medicine man, or healers using like folk medicine, using magic, ceremonies, rituals, plants, for both like insight, spirituality, and physical healing, among other practices. But tobacco in some parts of the world has always been a very potent, important healing tool and plant teacher. There was one practice I stumbled upon that I alluded to earlier of, what was it? Oomancy, or egg exorcisms. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
It comes from some like Latin American countries traditionally, but I got intrigued, so I went down this little rabbit hole and found out, and maybe some of our listeners have heard of or experienced this, but found out that there's a whole practice of using an egg to absorb negative energies. So I should have brought an egg. We could try it.
Yeah.
Because it would be, say, placed above your head and either rolled on your body, the egg, or waved around your body like a sage smudge stick. And then after that, it might sit for a while, but at some point, usually that day, it would be cracked open, put in a glass of water, and put under your bed while you sleep. And then the next morning or day, the medicine woman would look at the egg and the water and divinate or tell from what's happened to the egg, if the negative energies, negative spirits were absorbed into it successfully, or if more work needed to be done.
Where did you hear about this?
Wikipedia. No. And
how did it find its way to you?
Oh, because I was looking, I was going down these rabbit holes about curandero practices, because I've always really loved that term, like curar, cure. It shows up in medicine songs, cura mi cuerpo, things like that, and being in the healing world through a Western lens. The more I travel, like I've gone to Haiti, I've gone to Thailand, Burma. I've like I'm so fascinated by like the voodoo practices in Haiti, or even like, when I've traveled to New Orleans, I've gone into the depths of the swamps seeking some of these like traditional practices because it's so fascinated me. And this was one that I just encountered and read different accounts of personal experiences. I tend to gravitate towards the medical literature. There were some editorials on the practice, but also just the Wikipedia page on Oomancy.
Egg exorcism.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So do you know what scrying is?
I've heard of scrying. Yeah.
Scrying is like that, looking at the shape of something to interpret messages from the divine.
Like tea leaves and stuff.
Yeah, reading the tea leaves, which is a cool practice.
Or the animal bones or something like that.
Yeah, or cedar prayers. I've encountered that a lot lately in ceremonies where there will be a sacred fire and you can offer a cedar prayer. Like take a little, it's kind of cool. We're sitting in a cedar psychiatry clinic.
Right.
You could take some cedar leaves or plant and throw it in the fire and just watch what happens in the smoke.
Yeah, I definitely don't have any personal expertise in scrying, but yeah, that sounds compelling.
Yeah, no, it's pretty neat. It's like kind of like tarot card reading or the Tao Te Ching, the methods of divination that we've lost touch with here, where like if you lived in France 500 years ago or a few hundred years ago, you might call the king might call the court jester in with the knickerbockers and the cool outfit to do a card reading of like, should we invade this country? Yes or no? Yeah. Magic 8-ball. It's kind of cool.
Wow. Yeah, I like to think of different epistemologies, different ways of knowing. And in our Western world, heavily influenced by the Enlightenment, we use rational thought, the scientific method, observation, empiricism to come to conclusions, and it's served us really, really well. But I think, like you're maybe implying, we've also lost touch with a lot of the intuitive ways of knowing, which is a different kind of epistemology.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating, though, like as we've entered the psychedelic world, this realm, to discover that so many of the answers are actually inside of us, or like how much our intuition can guide us in such a wise way, like the inner healing intelligence or your inner compass, and how these plants were used and other methods like tarot cards or tea leaves to enter some non-ordinary state or place, like a ritual, if you will, or a ceremony to make it sacred, to set apart from the default world, normal waking consciousness, so you can be outside of that default mode and receive, like you said on Hape, a channel.
Yeah, I have loved that experience of pendulating kind of in and out of this modern Western world that I've learned to function quite well in, and then out into the world of intuitive and spiritual. I started out in my life a very intuitive, spiritual person, then became probably too reliant on rational thought as I went to college for a freaking eternity. And so now I'm feeling more integrated lately because of my willingness. This is just me thinking out loud about my path, my journey in life, but my willingness to hold my skepticism in the waiting room of my mind and entertain some of these things. Because I hear you talking about Oomancy, and I think, what the hell? That sounds like complete bullshit. So I tell that part of me, duly noted, hang out in the waiting room, and let's just see what this is all about.
Have you encountered Guatemalan worry dolls ever? It's the cutest thing. Like I went to Guatemala on a medical trip a long time ago, but remember coming across this idea that with kids or adults, there'd be these cute little worry dolls, like handmade, colorful, very kind of culturally crafted. And you, before going to sleep at night, you would give them your worries.
Oh, I love that.
Think about it like with your kids or yourself. If you were to unload that based on what we know about the mind from a Western lens and how cool these ceremonial practices are that didn't need our scientific explanation to figure that out. But that practice could be so beneficial for someone's insomnia and anxiety.
Yeah, I don't see children in my clinical practice anymore, but I did for a time, and we had sometimes I would do what I call the worry box, where I just get a shoe box, have the kid. We have a fly that's assaulting us.
We should have a slow motion of that.
But yeah, and I'd have the kid decorate it, make this box what they wanted it to be, a vault. Or I had one kid who made it, who made like a shoe box and made it like a monster's mouth. So the monster would eat his worries.
Yeah, that's cool.
He'd throw them in there and they'd write them down on a little piece of paper, put them in there, and like the worry box, worry monster has it. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. But I agree. Well, I think I may have mentioned this before, but when I started my career, I just finished residency. This is, 13 years ago now or so. I was like, I'm going to save the world. Let's go. And I legit hopped on a plane after the Haiti earthquake and was there working in tent clinics. And I trekked around with the Global Health Alliance at the university through rural Ghana, setting up telehealth linkages, thinking, oh, we can help. We know a lot. I went to school for an eternity too. But every time I'd come back shook that I just learned so much from this culture and I don't know how much I helped out there. Yeah. In Haiti, working in this tent clinic over and over, sure, I was able to bring some people some anti-seizure medicines that they lost access to from the earthquake, or even on occasion an antipsychotic, but that gets debatable if you have you're in a severe episode of schizophrenia, something like that. But I never once felt even an inkling to treat someone's PTSD with medicine in Haiti. It was everyone holding each other in this suffering in such a strikingly profound way. And I'm going around refugee camps along the Thai-Burma border, and each time coming back just thinking, whoa, I'm learning more from other cultures than I'm bringing with a Western medical model. And then ayahuasca just blew the lid off that. It was wow. I went searching for treatments for clients, with, say, severe mental health conditions, eating disorders, and just got way more than I bargained for, an opening of the importance of ceremony, ritual, and spirituality in the work we do.
One of the things that fascinates me about you and your mind and how you've developed is you have this, rigorously trained, very efficient scientific mind. And then you mix it with all the spiritual stuff, the yogi stuff, the what you just described.
Yogi medicine.
I think it makes you a great asset. I'm plugging Reid Robison for the psychedelic renaissance.
Thank you,
but I think it makes Reid a great asset in this psychedelic renaissance, because I don't feel worried that you're going to get captured by either side, because you seem to be walking the line very well.
Recapture the rapture.
Yeah, I'll let you know if you fall off the balance beam. But
please do, and thank you. That means a lot, and I see the same in you. I think we're like-minded spirits on this journey through science and spirituality, and it's a beautiful blending of the two, I think. Because, even when I worked in an eating disorder treatment center, one of my favorite things I ever did was running spirituality groups, and it felt so meaningful to be able to touch into that transpersonal space with people outside of the individual struggle that is so hard at times.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about Hape?
Well, I think we need to be careful and cautious about, especially those working on the relationship with nicotine. Yeah. Because I have encountered many people, even shamans I've worked with, who have said, oh yeah, I don't work with Hape anymore. I felt too much of a draw to it. And with that variable amount of nicotine, and if people do get over that intensity to the other side and really like to use it multiple times a day, it can become habitual.
I wonder if then people have maybe unhealthy relationships to other stimulating medications, medicines, drugs, that maybe they want to be cautious about Hape as well?
You know what's interesting, just as an aside, a fun fact, is that individuals with schizophrenia smoke 3 times more than the general population, and 3 times as many cigarettes as often when they do. And it's because in a state of psychosis, the nicotine and the nicotinic receptors it hits and the cognitive enhancing that comes from it is such a positive thing for them to even get a little bit of in a state of psychosis. So you can also see why it fits well as to punctuate ceremonies or like psychedelic, aka psychotic states, with a little bit of Hape. But it is worth being cautious. And I guess what I would say is every time something goes into your body, my personal rule of thumb is just to ask myself, like, why am I taking this into my body? And like really making sure it's done with intention. And taking breaks. Rule number 2 is like, we are habit forming machines, and you do something every day, it will become a habit, whether or not it's physiologically wired and hooked or behaviorally habituated. Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think those are really important precautions. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Reid, for being you, for being awesome.
Likewise.
You, and for having this conversation with me about Hape.
I like this heart open Steve after Hape. I think this might be becoming our ritual.
Yeah.
We've done it a couple times now, 2 or 3 before.
Yeah. If you want me to keep complimenting you, yeah, let's keep
I'll
doing
give you the
Hape.
complimentary blends. Yeah, no, you're always a very heart open, heart guided individual. So
I try to be, for sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear listener, for listening. It means a lot to me. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen or watch. Also, if you're feeling generous today, please leave us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. Thanks again. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Please consult a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.